looking for my like 3 pages of notes.
Oh yeah. Hey V,
Yo,
it
what's up?
is the post pod, and
Hey, what? Go.
let's do this with alliteration. It's the post pod with no pneumonia.
Like, where are you going with this?
Yeah.
You can everyone that's listening, you can just hear it in Mark's voice that my guy's back.
Oh, I was
He's back.
literally dying.
Ugh,
Yeah. Yeah. I
not
was joking
good.
around with you before, but I really like breathing.
Yeah,
It's so great.
kind of vital, isn't it? Eh?
Yeah. Even at that, I still have some coughs and
Well,
whatnot, but
that's okay.
yeah,
Well,
I
great to
don't
have
feel
you
like I'm
back.
dead.
Great to have
Yeah.
you back, man. You seem like you're.
I was on the brink. Drugs are
You should have
wonderful.
told me sooner. I would have sent you some soup.
Oh, wow.
Anyways,
Well, let's talk about this soup for the soul with Nancy Duarte. Well, it wasn't quite exactly soup for
how
the soul,
you
but I mean, considering we do so
soup
much
for the
in
creative mind.
decks, yeah, like it kind of is soup for the soul. Having that
Totally,
conversation with her.
totally.
What'd you think?
Man, like I'm half joking. I have literally 3 pages of notes from our conversation with her, and
Yeah.
I think what I loved most is I felt like someone understood me. Like they knew what I was going through. They understood the struggles. They understood the things that you could be doing differently. So I definitely appreciated it, and I'm sure a lot of you listeners would have been, oh my goodness, like where were you all my life?
Yeah. Yeah.
So good, so good.
Yeah. Where do you want to start with that? Like,
Well, just off the top of my head, there's a couple things that really stood out, and this may not seem groundbreaking in any way, but she talked about like the two things that you need to kind of think about when you're putting together your presentations and things like that. It's like, first of all, you need to definitely understand emphatically. I think she said it specifically, emphatically understand the audience.
yeah,
Don't dumb it down for the experts, like
right.
the ones that are in the room that are the know they're in the know. Like make sure you're speaking to their I don't want to demean it, but their intelligence level. So then if it's like you're getting the most out of that presentation,
Yeah.
and then definitely use those visual aids as much as possible. Like get away from text. I know, Mark, you're a great presenter, and like you're
Oh, thanks.
famously just put like one image up on the screen and you just talk to it. You have like no notes, no text, nothing like that. And I think that for me again is really interesting. Now, here's the thing, the kicker, if you will, for marketers. We'd like to do one thing to do, or sorry, we like to put together a presentation that can do and serve multiple purposes. So sometimes it's like you're sharing the deck up front. So you can't just send a deck that has a whole bunch of images in it
Mhm.
because people won't understand what the red line is. So we often are adding things like images and things to that effect. So also understand what is it that you're trying to do. So like there is places for more of our traditional decks, but
Mhm.
then when you're presenting it, you're
Yeah.
not presenting the facts on the deck. You're building a talk track around what people could visually read themselves. But that
Yeah.
balance between a visual and text has to skew visual.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought that was a really interesting point that she made. Just to build on what you're saying, like the idea of like, people partnerships, and there's always that slide with people shaking hands in front of a globe.
Yeah,
It's just like there's so many ways to do that, and
totally.
so like the empathy component of what you were talking about, understanding your audience, thinking about who they are, what they want to hear,
Yeah,
taking that single idea of partnerships, there could be a bazillion ways to do that
literally.
that are so much more impactful than just shaking hands in front of a globe.
Yeah.
The one thing that kind of made me rethink a little bit about that, though, is also explaining what it is,
Mm.
right? Like, so I think she talked about a cell membrane. There could be a partnership analogy, or she talked about Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. And so, like, one thing just to put up a picture of Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, but another thing to explain what it is that makes that so great.
Right.
I think we all have this shorthand around
Yes.
handshaking in front of a globe where you go, oh, it's
Yeah.
a partnership. Sure.
Yeah.
It's just a bit more work on the side of the presenter
Yes.
to bring that better analogy forward and make
Yeah.
it
Yeah. Yeah.
more like of an aha
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
impactful,
Yeah.
that I think is really important. And, coming back to the empathy thing, it's important like to pick the right image for the
Totally.
audience.
Totally.
Yeah.
No, and I absolutely love that. And like, it's such a small detail, but it's what separates a good presentation from a great presentation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, like, again, often if I look at our day-to-days, we're just trying to compound as much information as possible to get it out to the client, try to get it
Mm-hmm.
to our leaders, et cetera, et cetera. And sometimes maybe we just don't have the time to go
Mm-hmm.
back and really think things through, or then we're retrofitting what we've prepared for a true presentation. Because she did talk about, like, there's a slideshow and then a slide doc, right? Like,
Right.
there's kind of two different things. So know what is it that you're actually building. Even though, like I said, we as marketers, we try to do as much as we can in one area to hope like it can check as many boxes as possible.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing that I thought that was really interesting was, like, make sure you're building that tension, or building of tension, and then releasing of that tension. And
Mm-hmm.
I thought, like, in my mind, I just could see, like, how do you build up to that crescendo, if you will, and then, like, here's how we're going to solve this problem, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. So you're constantly creating this wave of emotion in a
Mm-hmm.
presentation that then holds or captures the audience to the fullest capacity, or the fullest ability, especially where most of this stuff that we're doing right now is virtual. And it's easy to
Yeah.
multitask than ever
Yeah.
before.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, and I like the point you made about the slideshows versus slide docs. I think so often we build these slide docs
Yeah.
often,
Yeah.
which tons of information on a slide, and we're sending it. I think that was one of the points you made earlier about during the presentation or during the interview about we build these decks as pre-reads almost,
Yeah.
and
100%
then we use the same decks as our
for presentation.
presentation for the
Yeah.
slideshow.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
show. It's just reread, and then there's a
Yeah.
problem there because then people's natural inclination is to either read or listen, and you don't do
Totally.
both. So then you're just going to read and listen to the thing that's being presented.
Yeah.
Yeah,
See? Like, it's like a ding, ding, ding moment. Like that. At least that's the way it was for me for the entire
totally. Yeah,
conversation. But
yeah.
like, it was like, you're right. Like, we're not. They're not. They're mutually exclusive. They can
Yeah.
build from one another. They're not the same thing, though. And I think all too often we don't take that extra step to say, okay,
Yeah.
now I'm presenting this to leadership. I'll just fire up that doc again, that
Mhm.
slideshow. We'll just walk you through the slides. It's like, it's
Mhm.
different. It's not the same.
She also talked about not using decks a couple times.
What?
Yeah. Remember, because she was talking about, like, you can use a napkin. If you're
Yeah,
trying to,
totally.
like, depending on what the objective is that you're trying to do, like a deck might not be the answer for every solution or
That's
for
true.
every problem,
Yeah.
which I thought was really interesting. Oh, that was
Yeah.
the other thing too about when we talked about data, how much data there is, and everybody's got data and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
It didn't always be that way.
Mm.
And how when you have data, you're kind of presenting. Once you get all the data, you kind of have either a problem or an opportunity. But then after that, there's a communication challenge.
Right.
And so it's not always enough just to show data. Like, you got to build
Yeah.
story around that to be able to communicate and influence people to move into a direction
Yeah.
of solving the problem or investigating the opportunity or whatever the thing is that you're trying to do. But
Yeah.
like storytelling, like data only gets you so far.
You're right. And sometimes we believe, like, the moment we just throw data up on our screen, that's enough. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
we're good. Let's wash our hands clean of that. We put the
Yeah.
data up there. It's a plus 30%. No one's going to ask any questions.
Right.
But often what happens is, like, well, there is a percentage of the nods that may feel alienated, sometimes may not understand the data, may not know what questions to ask. But then that's your role as a presenter, is to make sure, like, this information, the way it's being presented, especially when you're presenting data, you're presenting in a way that anyone could ask a question.
Totally.
Right.
Yeah.
What else
Yeah.
what else stood out for you?
I'm just trying to, like, I think the big one for me was really the idea of, like, building decks is different from persuasive communication.
Mm-hmm.
And I know, like, we've kind of talked a little bit about that a few different ways, but it isn't the same thing. And so, really stepping back at the beginning of the presentation, or the beginning of the interview, she talked about how important it is just to lay out a structure
Yeah.
like couple words per slide, and then you build your deck that way. And you can use that structure of like kind of what you were talking about before. I think assuming there's objections, try to figure out how to resolve those objections, but building that out with a couple of very simple words per slide to figure out what your story is.
Totally.
And that's a very different process than in general just throwing stuff onto a deck.
Well, maybe I could share this secret with listeners, but like we sometimes for some of our podcasts, we prepare with a tool called Coggle, right? Remember, it's like that flow chart where you like the building of idea, and you can kind of like wrap around like where do you want to come full circle. I feel like that tool or a tool like that is a great way to organize your thoughts and where is it that you want to go. And you can really pressure test it. It's like, does it make sense from starting here and then transitioning here? Is it building that, sorry, what did she call it? She called it, why am I blanking right now? The tension, building of that tension. Are you building that tension or then are you releasing it? And you could just apply that framework. I feel like it becomes you can create a really cohesive story. By also then keeping in the back of your mind, even like the Duarte method, where it talks about the delivery, the story, and this is what you're alluding to, but and visuals, and at the heart of that, it's all strategy.
Yeah, I think like so often we talked about this a little bit with her as well, but just communication in general, I think we oversimplify how
important it is.
Well, how easy it is. You know what I mean? Like, well, I did a presentation.
Yeah, it's done.
Oh, was it? I mean, even at that point, you go like, is it a slide doc? Or is it a slideshow?
Yeah.
Because if it's a slide doc and you're presenting that, there's a very good chance that nobody heard anything you said.
Totally.
Because they're just reading all the things that are on the slides.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, she did talk about the two biggest gaps that she sees right now, just in our industry, or generally speaking. I don't think it's just our industry specifically, but it's like there is that lack of empathy or the void of it, and storytelling. Like it's just not. Maybe the right word is here is like there's just not a strong skill set around that ability to storytell.
Yeah.
And you'd think, again, we've talked about, I don't know, man, how many episodes ago, or it feels like it always comes up in any episode. But for being creative and storytellers externally to consumers, we struggle with storytelling internally. And it starts by the way we're presenting.
Yeah, totally. And like, yeah, the tools that we're using in presenting often is a PowerPoint.
Yep.
But as we said before, like there's so many ways you can use it. And
Totally.
so just because it's a PowerPoint doesn't mean that you've achieved your outcome. You know what I mean?
Almost there.
Yeah. Yeah. There's one part as well that she talked about it being a glance medium. And I think kind of related to what we talked about with, the more information there is, people are reading, they're not listening. But yeah, I thought that was really interesting. Just thinking about it is like, it's almost as though the presenter is the guide.
Yeah.
Like you want them to glance the slide.
Yeah.
But you want the presenter to be the person to help bring them along. Yep. Even similar to that when we were talking about the handshake versus the Fred Astaire, like they glance the image, but then there's like the presenter is the guide that helps them understand what they're seeing and absorb it.
Right.
In a way that, because the presenters put all the empathy into understanding the audience and who they are and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
There's this over dependence, I think, on the slides to carry all the information and do the heavy lifting. Whereas I think it really is on the presenter.
Yeah.
To ensure that the message that they're trying to communicate is the thing that people hear.
You know what? I love that you brought that up, because there's moments when you're presenting data, and sometimes it's a row of data. It's just the way it has to be represented or presented. Like there's no way about it. And sometimes for a lot of people, they may read charts a lot differently than others, right? So you have to really create, like, follow the bouncing ball. And like a tactic sometimes that I use is like, I will number like the areas that we're going to speak to. It's like 1, 2, 3. And I put the number, like the little number beside the number that I actually want to talk to. So then I'm already telling the audience, we're going to talk about these 3 numbers specifically as a
Mhm.
part of this big chart. Now, if you have the mental capacity to do a lot of other processing as I'm presenting, you do you. But then
Mhm.
it really helps okay, we're talking about this number first, this conversion
Yeah.
rate number. Then here's your revenue number or your RGU number. And I just find like that helps with keeping the people, or like, I like to say, like, just follow that bouncing ball as
Yeah.
more methodical as possible, or being as methodical as possible in doing so.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a good point, because that comes back to the idea of like guiding people, right? The
Yeah.
idea of like, you can put a lot of stuff onto a slide,
Totally.
but then what do you want people to pay attention to? And
Totally.
what is the thing that you want people to follow?
Totally.
Yeah.
It's not, there's a lot of people that can build great decks. They look great and whatnot. But there's an art in being able to present that as at the same level that maybe it's being visually prepared for. Right.
Mhm.
And I think we can do a lot better in creating more of those, applying a lot of these different, frameworks to really storytell. And then
Mhm.
again, at the end of the day, just do the work justice.
Oh, one last thing for me that
Oh,
was stood out. Yeah.
yeah.
We talked about a chart or a slide or a deck or table,
Yeah.
whatever. And then she had that other tip about load it into like Chat GPT or whatever you
Oh,
want,
yeah.
and then
Yeah. Yeah.
ask
Yeah.
it to
Yeah.
interpret it like 5 different ways.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh,
Prepare
that's,
for questions.
yeah. Like, how could, a
Like,
CEO interpret this? How could a specialist interpret this? How could the
totally.
CFO interpret? Like,
Totally.
so good. I thought that was so, because then you could like actually, tweak the chart, not to say manipulate it so that it doesn't show what it actually meant to show,
No, no,
but
no, no. Yeah,
highlight different things about it, change the colors or whatever,
totally.
annotate it, all those kinds of things.
All of it.
Yeah, so
No, that's such
so
a
good.
great call out. If I
Yeah.
was wearing that hat, I tip my hat right
No.
now. It was good. Nancy, if you're listening, it was great having you on. Absolutely phenomenal. We'll probably look to reach out to you again at some
Yeah.
point. But it was really, really great. A lot of great tips and insights. So we really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Now, since you're feeling better, I know you can go chase that profitability now. So what are
I
you up
am
to?
going to try. I'm going to actually try to run up the stairs and see if I can catch them
That's
without
amazing.
dying on the way.
Yeah, you got this, buddy.
Yeah.
You got this.
All right, man.
All right. Have
Talk to you
a
soon,
great
Z.
day. Yeah, of course.